Good morning and good evening in New York City. I'm Steve Yamaguchi. I'm one of the pastors here at Tokyo Union Church, and I'm here with Kane Mitani, who is also an active member of our church. He was born in Vienna, but came back to Japan, studied at the Tokyo University, USC Film School, and his first professional film production job was on the set as a set production assistant for Silence in the shooting in Taiwan. And we are honored to have here with us today our guest, Mr. Martin Scorsese. He has received numerous awards, the highest in his field. He is one of the great filmmakers of today, and of the past half a century, his films have been some of the most influential films. We could go on and on about his film life, but we're really interested also in his life of faith. His life has been a long journey of faith, from childhood to today. And today he's here to converse with us both about his life and his faith. We're particularly interested in his connection to the story of Christians in Japan and the movie he directed and co-wrote based on the novel Silence by Shusaku Endo. Mr. Scorsese, welcome to Tokyo Union Church and welcome back to Japan.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. Very pleased. Very pleased to be with you, discussing this film and my thoughts as best I can on, as you say, search for faith in life.
Well, thank you so much. As you can tell, we're very excited to have you here. So grateful. This church was born just over 150 years ago. That was a year before the proscription against Christianity, the 2.5 century prescription, was lifted. Just 4 years into the new Meiji era project of modernizing Japan. At that time, Japan's doors opened, and so foreigners came and had to live in the neighborhood of Tsukiji, and a church was formed there. In that small enclave in the swampy Tsukiji district, was born of diverse immigrants seeking a place of belonging and community where they could worship in their language, in English, and nurture their children in the faith. Your grandparents left Sicily about 100 years ago, came to New York City, and lived in an enclave that was an ethnic enclave on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And that shaped your life, and the church was a central part of that community too. Can you tell us about that world, about your growing up, and the place of the church in the world that you grew up in?
Well, I feel that I grew up in a very special time, and that was I was born in 1942. So when I became aware of the cultural life I was living, was about 1949, 1950. But that prior to that, my parents were born on Elizabeth Street, which is the old Little Italy, in 1912 and 1913. My grandparents came over maybe 5 or 6 years before that. They were basically Southern Italians and Sicilians. So my grandparents and my parents are Sicilian. They didn't really speak what was considered normal Italian. They had their own dialect. They had their own sense of religion, their own sense of community. Actually, it was almost like I remember my mother was born in 232 Elizabeth Street, and that represented the city, I should say, the village and town of Cimina, which was outside of Palermo, maybe 1 hour. All the Ciminese lived in 232. My father was born across the street, 241 Elizabeth Street. That represented all the people from Polizzi. Polizzi was an hour outside of Palermo in the north. When they decided to marry, it was a problem because they had to, normally you would have the elders of the village discuss all this. But this new world through the customs and whatever they knew of life into a complete 360-degree change. America changed all of that, particularly in the 1920s, where there were certain freedoms of women having freedom cutting their hair and that sort of thing. But I really grew up in a world that was I'd say, if not mid-19th century thinking, almost medieval in terms of southern Italy, or really Sicily. Very, very much so, especially the role of a man, the role of a woman. God is in the church. You go to church on Sunday, whatever, but my parents never really took the religion as seriously as some of the others. I found that when I was growing up, at first, many of the priests who were in the Diocese of St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which is our major diocese there on Mott Street, many of them were really old Italian guys who would be dealing with the older generation who were dying out. Some of them didn't even speak English. So in effect, we had there was a break in a way. We were told to go to church on Sunday, etc. I learned more from the school I went to, which was St. Patrick's Grammar School, which was taught by the Sisters of Mercy. And the nuns would take us over to the church around the corner. And this is where I learned pretty much as possible about the catechism and about confirmation in the Catholic Church, this sort of thing. But it was very much growing up in a world that was fighting against becoming American. Not taking advantage, unfortunately, not taking advantage of the education. My generation, too, didn't really accept myself and a few other people. And so, in a way, I think they were just very happy to get away from oppression as peasants in Sicily and actually just simply get some food on the table for the family. Like my mother was one of 7 children. My father was one of 8. So they were all living in 2 rooms or 3 rooms. I never saw any of that. When we lived down there, I lived with my brother, an older brother, and there were 3 rooms, at least that. But the problem was that they still really thought very much in the old way. It was even I think a journey for them to make to democracy, for voting, any of that. And to add to this, I think the power structure from the old world had to do with what you call now the underworld, the underworld, what you call organized crime. In Sicily, maybe it was perceived differently. I'm not quite sure, but that followed all of them to this neighborhood, and so naturally they dealt with the elders in a way of those different crime families, who would adjudicate in different family discussions and problems and fights between different families of people, that sort of thing. And some would have to pay a fine, some wouldn't, that sort of thing. But, it was rife with crime. And it was a very, very, very tough area to live in. And it was extremely violent a lot of the time. The only place where I had some peace and quiet was in the church. Was in St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I really wondered, even though I couldn't understand too much what the older priest was saying, there was something very beautiful and very, I never knew what meditation was at that time, but I felt it there. That all changed when I met a younger priest who came to our parish. He was quite young, about 22 years old, 23. An Italian-American, Father Francis Principe. And I was around 11 years old at that time. And he was there for about 7 years. So for the formation of my adolescence, he became the mentor for myself and a number of others. And he was modern. He told us, you don't have to live this way. You don't have to think this way. Take advantage of school, read, see certain films, listen to this piece of music. And he really opened our minds, and he made sense. Now, my father made sense too, but he still had to deal with the traditional family issues in an old-fashioned way. And it was very, very suspicious of anything of the New World. And so for me, the real guide was this young priest who was there for like 6-7 years, who only recently died. And, he gave us books by Graham Greene, or books by, Dwight MacDonald, who was a very radical literary critic. We picked up James Joyce. I don't think they were very happy about that, but still, it opened up a world of opportunity and thinking, and also a sense of right and wrong that was somewhat different from, how should I say, the older draconian way of thinking from the poor peasants from Sicily. I mean, that gives you an idea. It was also, by the way, not only organized crime, but there was also what they called the Bowery. And the Bowery is now very chic. However, when I was growing up, it was not chic. And it has what they call now homeless people. But at that time, they were called bums. Sorry, but that's what they were called. Drunk, crazy, and dying in the streets, basically. And so they would just blend with us. So we all got to know them very much. And it was a very, very harsh and very, really ugly place. And yet the warmth came from, my family, my mother and father were extraordinary people, and other members of the family too. But the place was harsh and ugly. And it made me feel that one can divorce yourself in a way, or separate yourself from emotional reactions to people in need, because you get frightened. You're 9 years old, you're 10 years old, and you see these people who need you, and they're falling and drunk and crazy, and you get scared. They're fighting, there's blood everywhere. So, I mean, at times, not all the time. But in any event, it was a tough place. And I really couldn't put it together. The only place that made some kind of sense, aside, I said, from my father, was the church with this young priest, Father Principe. He made sense, and he was the one that took us out into the world. The other added element in my life at that time was the very, very severe asthma, in which I was kept from any sports or any kind of running and any kind of excitement. Even, I was pointing out, even to the extent of not laughing too much, because it can cause a spasm. And they were very worried about me. And so the streets were tough, but I was able to make my way through it by hanging around with some of the nicer kids too, some tough ones, but also using my own wits, basically, to stay out of danger as much as possible. But the one, as I said, who really gave us the guidance was Father Principe. And so I, in a way, wanted to be a priest, to be like him. And what I didn't realize, of course, is that a vocation is not as simple as saying, I want to be like that person. A vocation is I don't know how one could even describe it. It's beyond a way of life. It's like giving your life to others. I didn't understand it. I was 13 or 14 years old, and I went into a preparatory seminary, and I realized it's not for me. And I understood too that I think what I wanted to do was escape from the whole world, thinking that by becoming a religious clergy, I would be out of harm's way, I think, in terms of the pain of the world. Instead, it was the opposite. And so I learned that harshly in my first few months there at this preparatory seminary. And then, as they say these days, I was invited to leave. And they were so right.
Well, thank you for sharing this part of your story. It really enriches our understanding of your whole filmography, but also the thing we'd like to focus on now is the question of silence, and the story about priests. How did you encounter this Japanese novel? And when you read it, it affected you and you made some decisions around that. Could you talk about how you encountered it and what it meant and what compelled you to want to make this movie?
I think what happened was that it became possible that we could make independent films in New York. I then went to New York University. That combined with Father Principe's guidance and an awareness of American underground films, but particularly foreign films, we were able to make pictures. And I think I put a lot of the energy I had and purpose that I had in life from wanting to be cleric into the process of filmmaking. In other words, how do you do it in daily life if you're not one of the clergy? How do you deal with it? Do you do it through art? I didn't understand. I didn't say art at the time, but in other words, making films and what do these films say? So what eventually happened is that I wanted originally to make a film on the gospel. I think it was Matthew. And I wanted to make it in black and white 16 millimeter in New York, modern day, in 1960. This was where the apostles would be in suits and, poor suits, but all the white hallways and the women keening, dressed in black, covered in black, and Jesus being crucified and with the two thieves on the New York docks, right by the docks, and all the city behind him, And I was going to do that. And then I saw Pasolini's, probably the best film made on the life of Jesus, Gospel According to Matthew by Per Paolo Pasolini. And I realized I would have to find another way. And eventually that became a film called Last Temptation of Christ, which is a much debated film and much argued about. But in the process of making that film, it was so difficult to make. It was such a, I would say, suffering birth pangs in a way. If a man can imagine that, I don't know if a man can, but it was so visceral, so carnal to make that picture, particularly the crucifixion scenes and this sort of thing, that ultimately, when it was finished, along with the controversy of the picture, I realized that I had to go deeper. There was something that was obsessing me, and I think that was the iconography of the Catholicism that I was in, the crucifixion, or the crowning of thorns, all of this, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus with the disciples, Jesus in the temple, all of this. I had to go beyond it. That Christianity was demanding something else from me, and I didn't know, and I was kind of lost and then that night, the film was shown to religious groups in New York who didn't like it. It was the summer of '88. They were very angry about it. And there was one man there. He was Archbishop Moore, head of the New York Episcopal Church, St. John of the Divine. And we had a little dinner afterwards at a hotel. And he showed up with his wife. And he said, I liked the film a lot. He pointed out it was Christologically correct. And during that dinner, we knew that there was going to be a lot of difficulty with the picture. We knew that, but I saw that there were people who are members of the clergy and devout Catholics, devout Christians who felt that it was not a film that was a maudit, a film that was in a way against the religion or against Jesus. And so he said, but I want to give you a book. And this book is by a man named Shusaku Endo. And I just read Endo's book, Scandal, I remember. And he said, he described the story to me. And he said, the moment of Rodriguez and the Fume is an extraordinary thing. He says, talk about faith. This is something that you should read and think about. So the next day he sent the book, and I held it. I didn't read it. I was still dealing with the opening, or what you might call an opening of Last Temptation of Christ. And then I had to make another film called Goodfellas, a gangster film. Turns out it was a gangster film, although it's basically about the gangster lifestyle. In any event, Akira Kurosawa had, the great one, had asked me to play Vincent van Gogh in his movie Dreams. So long story, but we were shooting in my film, and my film started going over schedule, and he was finishing, and he was 80 years old. And this is 1989. And so finally, I got to Japan. We finished in August, and I got to Japan. I took the book with me, and I read it there while I did the Vincent van Gogh for Sensei, for Kurosawa. And when that moment came in the book, the confrontation with the Inui and the Christians hanging upside down in the pit, and Rodriguez and Ferrer and all that, I said, I have to make this into a film. I've got to do this. And within a year, we had the rights to the picture, to the book. And at that time, it had to do with the Italian company called Cecchigori, Vittorio Cecchigori. I was dealing a lot with the Italian industry at that time. The problem was for me, ultimately, that immediately I started working on the script with my friend Jay Cox. And I think we got about 40 pages in, and I couldn't do it. I simply couldn't do it. Bottom line is that I think it took me another 15 to 16 years of living to come to terms with the story, and come to terms with that moment in the book. It's not even about visualization. It's about what happened with Rodriguez, what happened with Ferrer, what happened. And I could not find it. I simply couldn't find it. And I kept trying. We kept trying writing it. I put it away. By that point, my manager and everyone in the movie industry, they were more interested in me making bigger films in terms of with big movie stars and that sort of thing. And every time I try to go and make the film, it'd be pulled away because the script wasn't ready, or there was a family issue. There was some illness in the family, and we couldn't do it. And so eventually, the rights to the picture became so convoluted that there's the old story of the Gordian knot that Alexander had to break, and finally took a sword and hit it. This was so complex and so difficult, but eventually, Irwin Winkler and a number of other friends of mine got together, and they worked it out, because they knew I wanted to make this picture so badly, and they worked it out. And at that point, I forced myself to just live with the book and organize as best I could the dramatic structure of the story. And then eventually got my friend Jay Cox, and we worked for about a month or two in a hotel and worked out the entire draft of the picture. And as I say, one of the hardest sections, of course, was the last sequences. And so for me, it was something I wanted to make so badly, because I thought I found something. I don't know. I know I was still in the search, I was still in there. And it was in that moment when he looks at the fume, and the fume hears the voice of Jesus. That's the moment. And I said, what? It's like what Terry Malick wrote to me, the great filmmaker, artist, wrote to me after seeing the film. By the way, Terry, I haven't seen Terry in years, but he just wrote to me out of the blue after seeing the film and said, what does Jesus want from us? And it's so beautiful. What does Christ want from us? Meaning, how do we react? How do we find him? How do we find this in this harsh reality of being human? How do we find the grace of the genuine love of God, and to understand that all around us is the love of God? In a way, I don't mean to sound I'm not a theologian, and I'm not. I could just tell you from experience, because I know when we made this picture, we meant it, and it changed everybody's lives when we made Silence in Taiwan. We made it, but we made everybody in the crew. You know, I don't say they all became religious, but there was a something spiritual happened to them up in the mountaintops and this sort of thing. And, you know, my wife is not, she was with us for a little while, but there's an illness there. And well, my daughter was with us and she was going through a hard time in early adolescence. And all of it came together in this picture. And so for me, that one night that Archbishop Moore gave me that book was a life-changing experience, because it allowed me to go deeper than where I thought I was going with Last Temptation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Kane would like to explore the journey of making that film with you.
So first of all, it has been an honor to be able to work on this life-changing work of yours. It was life-changing for me as well, and also for the cast members, some of which who have actually made it here to Tokyo Union Church.
Okay.
So thank you for the attendance.
My love to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, there were certain very, very special moments, especially the strongest one that remains in my mind was the crucifixion scene of Mokichi and the villagers who were played by Tsukamoto Shinya, and in the water. And that was just so sublime, and it was beyond words. We knew it was happening in front of us on a set, but still it was just so real that we just couldn't stop crying. And it was a very special moment to us.
I felt that. We all felt it. We all felt it. And
absolutely.
when I saw the rocks, I said, I want the crosses there. And my cameraman, Rodrigo, he said, I know he's going to want the crosses on the rocks. We're never going to get the crosses on the rocks. I hope he doesn't want it. And sure, I said, yes, it's got to be there. Look, it's perfect. That's exactly. And somehow they found a way. Dante, Ferretti, and Rodrigo, and all of you guys found that way to do that. I didn't put up those. I didn't do it. You know, I lined up the shots, and I did. You know, and you have this incredible actor. You have Tsukamoto. You've got, you know, you've got so many. You got these wonderful people up there, so brave and so moving in that sequence. That well, you were there. You know that a hush came over everyone when that scene was done.
Absolutely, it was still one of the most significant moments. Like, even in my life, I would say it was just so divine, and it made me realize this is what we do this for. This is the whole purpose of being in this world of expression and trying to find the core of the human existence. So
exactly,
I want to thank you for that. So in terms of, so you set out to make this film. It was a 28-year journey with a Japanese crew, Taiwanese staff and Japanese staff as well. Were there any moments, let's say, that you personally remember from seeing that stand out from the shooting experience that you had in Taiwan?
Well, I think pretty much, you know, I'm known for being, as I was saying earlier, having grown up as a coddled, sick child, not to go near animals. I couldn't go in. I would see green. I would start coughing and sneezing and having a respiratory ailment just by looking at a tree, you know. So, so for me to be doing a film that is, first of all, such locations were quite extraordinary. And for me, this was a major change in my life. And my manager, a number of people felt, no, be careful. He's not going to be able to do it. But we were able to do it. And something else spurred us on, you know, the climbing of the hills, all of that. I had people that were helping me. But bottom line is, because I really don't know how to do that sort of thing. I don't go hiking, or, you know, I grew up downtown in these brick tenements, you know. So what do I know from this? Sports, I have nothing to do with sports. So, you know, but for me, being out in these locations and being high up on those mountains sometimes, that was amazing. That was amazing. And watching the mist come in and realizing when the mist came in the village and I had Inoue coming in, Issei coming in on this horse. And I said, whoa, I said, let's do a rehearsal. And the villagers are lined up and the samurai are coming in and it's blank. There's nothing. We can't see anything. I said, start shooting. They said, but we're just rehearsing. I said, no, just shoot. And sure enough, slowly they emerge from the mist. And I said, oh man, this is this. There was just moments like that were remarkable. The Adam Driver is a terrific actor. Andrew Garfield, what he was able to do as Rodriguez, the emotional impact that the thing about Andrew was that often we discussed a lot off camera, but sometimes things were so intense in terms of his physicality. What I mean by that is the trauma he was going through for real in his heart. And don't forget, he was Father James Martin put him through the spiritual exercises, Francis Xavier. So he went through the spiritual exercises, so he understood the commitment of the Jesuit. And in any event, often if the scene was ready to go and the camera was let, I didn't say a word to him. I saw he was moving around the set, moving around, and eventually he's okay, let's go, and just start shooting. And sometimes he just transcended himself. The pain I think he was really going through was quite something. Adam Driver, too, on the last day of shooting, when he had to dive into the water to try to save the martyrs who were being pushed off the boat. Oh, Adam, it was interesting. I said, you guys have to lose weight. You got to lose weight. We had this nutritionist with us, I remember. And the nutritionist said, okay, 20 pounds, 30 pounds. Yeah. Now, it's easy for me to say. We're eating, dim sum is being brought to us. And meantime, the actors, Adam actually lost, I think, 35 pounds. I didn't quite understand that he went that far. He wanted to go. Andrew, I know, lost about 30 pounds, maybe more, during this process, during the shooting. And at some point, a couple of times with Adam, I noticed that he seemed to be in the frame when I was shooting. He seemed to be kind of wandering. And I said to the script person, I said, what's he doing? What's he doing? And then I got up and talked to him, and he said, I went in my trailer and I had a few berries and I had half a banana. And now I feel a little better. And I realized that they were so hungry that I think they were losing their sense of reality around them. So you see it in the film, you see a kind of glaze in his eyes. It's really quite real. The berries and the banana thing is based on what the nutritionist would do in terms of making sure that they were safe in what they were doing with their bodies. And thankfully, thank God they were. But they were so dedicated to it. And our Japanese actors and all of the Taiwanese people who were there helping us, but the Japanese actors were amazing. We learned a lot from a lot of actor discipline from them in terms of being able to perform under the worst circumstances. In one case, a typhoon. We had a typhoon. I didn't even realize it. We were driving. They were driving me. And I said, well, gee, it seems to be raining. They said, yeah, there seems to be a bad weather by the set. I said, well, what are we going to do? They think everything's fine. And as we're getting there, so no, it's a typhoon. It's really bad. I said, well, we were on, it was a scene with Kichijiro.
Yeah, the flashback scene.
You remember about the family and his sister, her hair goes on fire and the whole thing. And I said, this is impossible. I said, we have them there. This has to be done. I remember going in that little trailer I had. And all of a sudden, two guys come in and they were covered in rain gear and they were dripping. And they looked up and smiled and said, we could do it. And I said, who are you? I said, it's the cameraman. I didn't even recognize him. He was so covered. The cameraman and the assistant director. He said, we can do it. We can actually shoot. And they were able to. They were able to pull it together. And we shot that scene in a typhoon. Luckily, we didn't need sound that day. But there were earthquakes and things like that. But one gets in that part of the world, you have to tend to get used to that. But that typhoon was quite something.
Yeah.
But really, it was the strange thing happened to strange, beautiful moments in the last couple of weeks of shooting, particularly in the scene with the about to be martyred villagers hanging over the pits, and Liam Neeson and Andrew Garfield going at it, arguing in the jail, and then taking him out and telling him, step on the flea, do it. It was very early morning, and sure enough, the cocks were crowing, just as they did for St. Peter. That was real. That was real. But it was a remarkable time. It was magical.
Absolutely. So, so the film has come out in 2016, 17, and it's been 6-7 years since the movie come out. Even personally, I see people around me over time watching the movie and, you know, telling me how amazing it was and how, you know, they regret not seeing it the time it came out. But how do you feel about the movie aging over time, and from the vantage point of where you are right now, how does the movie stand out to you in your body of work, for example?
Well, as I said, Malik wrote me a letter. Francis Coppola, who doesn't write letters to me, wrote a letter about the film. Michael Mann, very one of the great directors, he loved the picture. So that was at that time. Since then, since then, there's this young director named Ari Aster who has seen the picture. He'd just seen it maybe 7 times already, and it really feels it's. He wrote me a note here. The most vivid representation of the Judas figure that has haunted so much of Scorsese's work. The tortured hero of silence finally achieves grace. He's talking about Kichijiro, the wretched Kichijiro. About Rodriguez, by abandoning his station, denying his God, and embracing his fellow wretch, Rodriguez becomes a true Christian. Now, Ari has made these films, very strong films, one called Hereditary and another called Midsummer. They're kind of gothic in a way, elements of thriller or horror, but he's a wonderful filmmaker. He's a real artist and young guy. Interestingly enough, last year in November, I turned 80. And of all places, Variety, which I live in New York, so I'm not part of the Los Angeles group. Or if that means anything anymore now with the internet and social media, I really don't know. But in any event, Variety ranked my movies for my 80th birthday. A man named Clayton Davis ranked my movies, all 25 of the narrative films. And he ranked number 1, Silence. Number 2, Raging Bull. Wow. Interesting. And, I'm in a world that doesn't talk like this, you see. As I only have maybe 1 or 2 friends who I could speak to like this in a way. Because one thinks, oh, you're being, pious, or you're being, fake piety and that sort of thing. No, this is my life. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I do. But I was so surprised at Variety of all things, and really amazing to find that is being constantly rediscovered. And that's, I've been told by others that outside of the cinema world, the film is certainly a picture that is very much in everybody's minds. There's a magazine called Parabola, which is quite a beautiful magazine. Tracy Cochran, a number of people, they in those circles, it is taken very seriously, and it is debated and it's discussed. And it seems to be going on. I don't quite get it. I don't quite know how. I don't see all this stuff, but people send me things. Friends of mine send me things that they think I should see. But the Variety thing, I couldn't help it. That was amazing. That my Thelma, my editor, said, "Look at this. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see what they're saying about." No, look. And it was Silence, number 1.
It just goes to show the timelessness of the work, and
that we think maybe. And you're right. There was no way at that time a film like that, especially in that world. The Academy did give it a nomination for the beautiful work of Rodrigo Prieto, but they're not there with this sort of thing. It's a particularly priests and particularly Catholicism. And it's just not something that is part of their world at all. In fact, it's kept away, I think, I don't say Christianity is completely, but certainly Catholicism. And so it was very interesting. They were respectful, though. They put it on a few of the top 10 films. The AFI did it. The American Film Institute had it on one of the 10 best films of the year, et cetera. But they kind of, I don't know. I don't belong there. So what can I say?
Thank you, Mr. Scorsese. In your history of filmmaking, you're no stranger to being criticized, particularly by religious groups at times, especially as you noted after the Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think you've been generous and courageous to do in your filmmaking is to depict violence and the darkest of our human nature and the evil that we can inflict on one another. This has caused some religious folks to criticize you again, but everything in your films is so purposeful and artfully done. Can you talk about your use of violence in your filmmaking?
Yeah. Yes, I'll talk to you about it, I think, because you're very sincere about it. I think there are other people who say, why are your films so violent? They don't understand. They don't understand that I grew up with violence as a way of communicating. It was not only a way of communicating, it was an option in discussion. Yes, it escalated things, et cetera. But violence was, and I whether it's a street fight or a hitman killing someone that I didn't see, but I have been around where bodies have been dropped off. I mean, we find, call the police and say, listen, there's somebody lying in the ground there. He doesn't look like he was drunk or anything. He's well dressed, and it was late at night. And Jimmy, a guy named Jimmy, the cop would come over and, you kids get out of here. So, and find, the guy was dropped off. He's dead. So, I mean, violence is very much a part of, and particularly very much a part of, I grew up in a volatile community, in a volatile family. And so it's very important to express or to show violence in a film in an honest way, just an honest way. It just, it has to be truthful, not real, because I don't know if you could do real, whatever real is at this point, but truthful through the characters and to the situation. And you shouldn't hold back. But over the years, I've been pulling back wider angles from it because the violence has gotten so terrible that it has to be like a fact. Frank Sheeran shoots Jimmy Hoff, bang, like that, 2-shot, nothing else. We know what he did. We know what he did to his best friend, man he loved. This is Kichijiro. You see, this is a man going through his own tormenting himself. He put himself in a life that way, and that's what had to happen. And there's no need to punch in and go tight and see blood flying everywhere. Hold it, just hold it and show it. Now, in the earlier days, the violence was very strong in my films. There's no doubt about it. I think it's important to show it as real, as truthful as possible, because otherwise it becomes artificial violence. And artificial violence, and there's a great tradition of it, by the way, in some of the American Westerns and that sort of thing. But artificial violence, what I mean by bar fights in Westerns, things happen in those bar fights that one hit like that, a person would be dead. But instead they're jumping around, In any event, it's a style. It's a part of a style of filmmaking. Now, the artificial violence could be beautiful, could be choreographed in such a way as you have like a Kurosawa in Seven Samurai, or in Yojimbo, so many, or Kobayashi in this film Harakiri and Samurai Rebellion. There's so many that I don't know if I feel it, but what we're seeing is almost like an action painting. and it's like dance. It's something else entirely. You feel it, but it's really more stylized. And what I had to, when I was growing up, these things would happen in front of me. And I had no other way of expressing myself about it. We talk about it the next day. And I have to admit, as a young person, as a kid was 15 to 16, 17, sometimes fights in bars or in the streets and everything. It was exciting. It was exciting. And I do admit that often there was violence in films when I was growing up, certain films or things that I saw, or even a couple that I did, where there's a very troubling aspect of being titillated by it. Now, what I'm interested in there is why? What is that in us, in our human nature? I don't want to push it out of my head. I don't want to say it doesn't exist, because it's going to come back and hit me in the wrong way at the wrong time. Trying to find an aspect of the truth in myself. Saying if it's ugly, it's ugly. I don't even think some people are going to see the movies I made, quite honestly. We just thought they were going to be made and shown in the theater for a couple of weeks, and then that was it. There was no television at the time that showed movies. They were always edited with commercials. So there was no streaming service or a service where a film would be shown uncut and uninterrupted. So they were made for certain people who felt that way or wanted to see that kind of film, or felt that they could identify with the people in a picture like that, like Mean Streets or Taxi Driver, or particularly Raging Bull. But in any event, Raging Bull is more about the torturing that we do to ourselves in that sense. And hence we get, that wonderful film on the great novel, Diary of a Country Priest, where the priest finally tells the other person, he says, stop doing this to yourself. God is not a torturer. He wants us to be merciful with ourselves. And I was about 18 when I saw that. Yes, he's not a torturer. We're the ones doing the torturing. We're torturing ourselves. We have to. God may forgive us, but can we forgive ourselves to move on and change your life and be there for others? This is what it's about, I think. And so the violence for me is very, very serious. And for example, the great filmmaker from Mexico. Alejandro Inarritu, who did who did The Revenant and those incredible films. The night he was in LA with me, Los Angeles, and there was a big party. And we're looking at all these kids jumping around. It was great. We're older. I'm older than he is. But he looked at me, and this was maybe 8 years ago or so. And he looked at me and said, they don't understand. He comes from Mexico. He said, they don't understand that we come from a culture where violence is serious. I said, I know. I don't get it. In a sense, they think violence is a little bit of a game, like a kind of like a game that pinball games or whatever, some of these new games or whatever, you can kill people with, in terms of, what do they call it? Social media kind of things or those kinds of games. Yeah, there's a kind of satisfaction in that to a certain extent in terms of hitting a target, so to speak, or, but there's something else going on now. It's definite anger, hatred, and killing. And the violence that I grew up around was it was scary. And I have to admit, as a young person, sometimes it was exciting. I didn't want to get into it. I would never be able to handle it myself, but I was very lucky. I escaped being shot. One night by accident. I escaped by accident. The shooting was serious. And that became the film Mean Streets. Because the next morning when we found out what had happened, my friend and I, who had left that car, when we found out what had happened the night before, we realized we were living, and my friend said, we're living on borrowed time. This was 1963. 2 kids were shot in the car. We were in the car, we left. Something happened. They got into an argument. And these guys shot them. And that created my whole body of work, basically, because why wasn't I in that car? Why didn't I get shot that night? What made my friend Joe and myself get out of the car and go home? it's extraordinary. And what was it all about? It was about nothing. It was about macho male dominance. It was about nothing else. There was an argument between these guys. And so that, that was very real. I'm sorry, it just is. There is also the psychic violence, the emotional violence of trauma. I mean, I had that a lot. I saw that people in my family go through it. And it was absolutely, actually, in a funny way, it was more terrifying. A good example of this is that incredible moment in the great Mizoguchi film, the great Mizoguchi film. The first Japanese film I saw was Ugetsu. So it was on television. So it was Mizoguchi, then Kurosawa. I went to see Kurosawa film Seven Samurai in a theater. It was different. And Ikiru, which was my favorite. But in any event, the film's called Life of Oharu. And there's a scene towards the end where this poor woman, who's the geisha, or I don't know, prostitute, there's an older man who takes her with a lantern and says, come with me. He's very nice to her. He's very nice. And he takes her around, and he takes her into a place, and he sits her down. He says, have some tea or whatever. And we noticed that there are about 5 or 6 other young men in the background. And he says, come with me now. And he takes her by the hand. He brings her over to these young men. And he turns and he says to them, now, all of you, basically, you want to live a life with lust. You want to live a life in the impermanence. This is it. Look at her. This is a woman. This is what you want. She's nothing but, in the translation, was a goblin cat. In the English translation, says she is absolutely anathema. She's not even human, basically. And the image, it's all one shot too. Her face, the way she moves, the actress, is probably one of the most cruel things and brutal scenes I've ever seen. And I saw that when I was about 20 years old. I'm talking going back to 1960 something. So it isn't like I saw it yesterday. I haven't seen Oharu in years, but I'll never forget that moment. I said, oh, this man's being what makes it even worse is that he's so nice to her. He takes her into the room. He's giving her tea, come in, it's nice, sit down here. Next thing, look at this horror. This is a woman. This is a woman. This is what you want. Ugly nightmare. Get her out. It's quite that kind of violent. It was so disturbing. It's something you never forget. So for me, it's like violence. We just did it in the films. We just did it. We did it. In the case of Mean Streets, very clearly, a taxi driver, of course, but we did it in the sense that it was almost matter of fact. This is how it happened. This is what it saw. This is what I saw when that guy hit the sidewalk, when somebody kicked his head in. This is what I saw that night on such and such in the bar when so-and-so threw that bottle. This is what I saw. It's like, and that I'm just trying to translate it to you.
Mr. Scorsese, thank you so much. Thank you for your candid response to that question too.
Thank you.
We're running out of time, and
sorry, I do go on.
Things. No, wonderful. Thanks. We have so many questions. One of our choir members submitted a question that we've all wondered, and it's the difference between the ending of the novel and your ending, where the sense of ambiguity seems to be less ambiguous in the film ending. Can you speak to that very quickly?
Yeah, this was something that myself and my writer friend, Jay Cox, came up with the idea. What was interesting to me in the novel, particularly once he apostatizes, the novel then becomes a diary by a Dutch captain from we don't know. And so we're seeing what's happened to him through the eyes of another European who hardly knows anything about the culture or anything like that. So, and I believe he's Protestant too, so it's not Catholic. So in a way, we kept reading, and I said, and they kept talking about, well, can we dramatize it through Rodriguez, and can we dramatize? I said, no, it's got to be objective. It's got to be from this diary. But as we read it, there are indications, and some of the other people who are helping us too, discussing it. There are many indications, and we show it in the picture too, that he still continued to deal with being a Christian. He was constantly being checked. At one point, Kichijiro was taken away. Yeah. And so we felt that Endo was telling us that he found, I may be wrong in the phrase I'm using, but he found Jesus his own way. He found something deeper and stronger. And so the cross in his hand, his wife knew, and put the cross in his hand in the Buddhist burial scene, because she knew that that
Yes, thank you.
in his heart he's still Christian, and I think he may have been. I think the indications are there if you read that carefully in the book. So we took a chance and placed it in his hand there at the end, and it's something that we worked on for a very, very long time to make that decision.
I can imagine.
It's indeed that less ambiguous and more aspiring and positive sort of ending that I think that struck the heart chords of everyone who watched it. And in the end of the movie, you place the text for the Japanese Christians and their pastors ad majorem Dei gloriam. And, you know, in this day and age where religion is kind of seen with a grain of salt and with all the stigmas and whatnot that accompany it, like, what do you feel our way forward would be as a person of faith or otherwise?
Well, I think we're in a period of incredible change and incredible transition. And when that happens, there are seismic upheavals in how we think, how we behave in our institutions. The one truth is the nature of God's love. This is a truth, I think. And that could be through consciousness, that could be through whether science thinks they could figure everything out in the final analysis, whenever that is, in 1,000 years from now, who knows? Still, there'll always be more to know. And in a way, in a sense, for me, that gives me a great deal of hope and to continue faith in this kind of journey through the harshness of our human nature to find the truth of the genuine nature of God's love. This is really what our journey is about, ultimately. And it may be, as Father Rodriguez there, he's basically serving people by the end. Or in Tolstoy's Father Sergius, read that novella, which ends in a similar way. Maybe it's just being there for those who are in need. And it's about being with others and being for others. And through that, one finds the love of God. And maybe that's really what it's about. Like, I made a film called Bringing Out the Dead, about the paramedics in New York, where at one point the character who is so upset at nighttime in New York, which is very crazy and dangerous. And at one point he says, I would be in situations where people are suffering so much that there's nothing I could do for them. Nothing. All the medicine's gone, everything's gone. I'm sitting there, and he said, all I could do is be there and be, as he used the phrase, a grief mop, like wiping up the grief and taking it onto myself and suffering with them in silence. And even that, I'd say, well, that's easy. It's not easy at all. It's not. I know if one, I don't know if you know, a friend of yours is very ill or somebody's been, go and visit them. I always found there's some people who are very good at that, and others just freeze up. They don't know what to say. Yeah, visiting a very, very sick person and dealing with that. And I find that's the real compassion. That's real compassion. And sometimes I have a friend of mine who's this is great actor who just is able to do that. He goes and meets people who are dying of cancer. He sits there with them, doesn't say a word, just sits there. And they feel the love and they feel the compassion, maybe the best we can do, but it is finding God that way.
I feel like we could do this with you all night. This has been so rich. Thank you for giving us your Saturday night. We're so honored to have had you here. We're so blessed by what you've shared, and we continue to pray God's blessing on you and your faith and witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's express our thanks to Mr. Martin Scorsese.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're so generous. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much.
Well, blessings on all.